Hello readers, welcome back to Reads with Room B with me, Room B. I am so sorry that it has been so long since I have produced a video for you. I am working to be better and get back on track. We last left off with Alice's adventures in Wonderland and through the looking glass and what Alice found there. So we're going to get right back into that and hopefully we can finish it up in a week or two. We are on chapter 7 of Through the Looking Glass. Let's begin. It's my own invention. After a while, the noise seemed to gradually die away, till it all was dead silence. Alice lifted up her head in some alarm. There was no one to be seen, and her first thought was that she must have been dreaming about the lion and the unicorn and those queer Anglo-Saxon messengers. However, there was the great dish still lying at her feet, on which she had tried to cut the plum cake. So I wasn't dreaming after all, she said to herself. Unless they were all part of the same dream. I do hope it's my dream, and it's not the Red King's. I don't like belonging to another person's dream. She went on in rather a complaining tone. I've a great mind to go and wake him up and see what happens. At this moment, her thoughts were interrupted by a loud shouting, "Ahoy! Ahoy! Check!" And a knight dressed in crimson armor came galloping down upon her, brandishing a great club. Just as he reached her, the horse stopped suddenly. "You're my prisoner," cried the knight, as he tumbled off his horse. Startled as she was, Alice was more frightened for him than for herself at the moment, and watched him with some anxiety as he mounted again. And as soon as he was comfortably in the saddle, once again he began, "You're my—" But here another voice broke in, "Ahoy, ahoy, check!" And Alice looked around in some surprise for a new enemy. This time it was a white knight. He drew up by Alice's side and tumbled off his horse just as the red knight had done. And then he got on again, and the two knights sat and looked at each other for some time without speaking. Alice looked from one to the other in some bewilderment. "She's my prisoner, you know," the red knight said at last. But then I came to her rescue," the white knight replied. "Well, we must fight for her then," said the red knight, and he took up his helmet, which hung from the saddle, and was something in the shape of a horse's head, and put it on. You will observe the rules of battle, of course," the white knight remarked, putting on his helmet too. "I always do," said the red knight. And they began banging away at one another with such fury that Alice got behind a tree to be out of the way of the blows. And there is the white knight and the red knight going at it. "I wonder now what the rules of battle are," she said to herself as she watched the fight, timidly peeping out from her hiding place. "One rule seems to be that if one knight hits the other, he knocks him off his horse, and if he misses, he tumbles off himself. Another rule seems to be that they hold their clubs with their arms, as if they were Punch and Judy. What noise they make when they tumble, just like a whole set of fire irons falling from the fender. And how quiet the horses are. They let them get on and off again, just as if they were tables." Another rule of battle that Alice had not noticed seemed to be that they always fell on their heads, and the battle ended when they're both falling off this way and side by side. And when they got up again, they shook hands. The red knight mounted and galloped off. "It was a glorious victory, wasn't it?" said the white knight as he came up panting. I don't know, Alice said doubtfully. I don't want to be anybody's prisoner. I want to be a queen. So you will when you cross the next brook, said the White Knight. I'll see you safely to the end of the wood, and then I must go back, you know. That's the end of my move. Thank you very much, said Alice. May I help you off with your helmet? It was evidently more than he could manage by himself, however. She managed to shake him out of it at last. Now one can breathe more easily, said the knight, putting back his shaggy hair with both hands and turning his gentle face and large mild eyes towards Alice. She had thought she'd never seen such a strange-looking soldier in all her life. He was dressed in tin armor, which seemed to fit him very badly, and he had a queer-shaped little deal box fastened across his shoulders upside down, with the lid hanging open. Alice looked at it with great curiosity. I see you're admiring my little box, the knight said in a friendly tone. It's my own invention. To keep clothes and sandwiches in, you see. I carry it upside down so the rain can't get in. But the things can get out, Alice gently remarked. Do you know the lid's open? I didn't know it, the knight said, in a shade of vexation passing over his face. Then all the things must have fallen out. The box is no use without them. He unfastened it as he spoke, and was just going to throw it into the bushes, when a sudden thought seemed to strike him, and he hung it carefully on a tree. Can you guess why I did that? He said to Alice. Alice shook her head. In hopes maybe some bees make a nest in it, and then I should get to have the honey. But you've got a beehive or something like one fastened to the saddle. Yes, it's a very good beehive, the knight said in a discontented tone. One of the best of its kind, and not a single bee has come near it yet. And the other thing is a mouse trap. It's supposed to keep mice. I suppose the mice keep the bees out, or the bees keep the mice out. I don't know which. I was wondering what the mouse trap was for, said Alice, and it is very likely that there wouldn't be any mice on a horse's back. Not very likely, perhaps, said the knight, but if they do come, I don't choose to have them running all about, you see. He went on after a pause. Well, it's as well to be provided for everything. That's the reason the horse has all those anklets around his feet. Yes, but what are they for? Asked Alice in a tone of great curiosity. To guard against shark bites, the knight replied. It's an invention of my own. Now, help me on, would you? I would like to go with you to the end of the wood, and that's what the dish is for. Oh, wow, I'm sorry. What's that dish for? It's meant for plum cake, said Alice. Well, we'd better take it with us, said the knight. It'll come in handy if we find any plum cake. Help me get it into this bag. It took a long time to manage, though Alice held the bag very carefully because the knight was so very awkward in putting the dish in. The first 2 or 3 times he tried, he himself fell instead. It's a rather tight fit, you see, he said as they got it in at last. There are so many candlesticks in the bag. And then at last he hung it on his saddle, which was already loaded with bunches of carrots, fire irons, and a great deal many other things. I hope you've got your hair well fastened on, he continued as they set off. Only in the usual way, Alice said, smiling. That's hardly enough, he said anxiously. You see, the wind is so very strong here. It's as strong as soup. Have you invented a plan for keeping hair from being blown off? Alice inquired. Not yet, but I've got a plan for keeping it from falling off. I should like very much to hear it. First you take an upright stick, said the knight, and then you make it then you make your hair creep up in it, like a fruit tree. Now the reason hair falls off is because it hangs down, but things never fall upwards, you know. So it's a plan of my very own invention. You may try it if you like. It didn't sound a comfortable plan, thought Alice, and for a few moments she walked on in silence, puzzling over the idea, and every now and again stopping to help the poor knight, who was certainly not a good rider, who, whenever the horse stopped, which it did very often, he fell off the front, and whenever it went on again, which it generally did rather suddenly, he fell off behind. Otherwise, he kept on pretty well, except he had a habit now and again of falling off sideways. And as he generally did this on the side on which Alice was walking, she soon found that it was the best plan not to walk quite so close to the horse. I'm afraid you've not had much practice in riding, she ventured to say, helping him up from his fifth tumble. The knight looked very much surprised and a little offended at this remark. What makes you say that? He asked as he scrambled back into the saddle, keeping hold of Alice's hair with one hand to save himself from falling over with the other. Because people don't fall off quite so often when they've had much practice. I've had plenty of practice, said the knight in a very grave voice. Plenty of practice. And there is the knight with Alice and all his things on his horse. Alice could think of nothing better to say than indeed, but she said it heartily as she could, and they went on a little way in silence after this, the knight with his eyes shut, muttering to himself, and Alice watching anxiously for the next tumble. The great art of riding, the knight suddenly began in a loud voice, waving his arms as he spoke, is to keep, and here the sentence ended suddenly as it began, as the knight fell heavily on top of his head, exactly in the path where Alice was walking. She was quite frightened this time, and said in an anxious tone as she picked him up, I do hope no bones are broken. None to speak of, the knight said, and as if he didn't mind breaking 2 or 3 of them. The great art of riding, as I was saying, is to keep your balance properly, like this, you know. He let go of the bridle and stretched out both his arms to show Alice what he meant, and this time he fell flat on his back, right under the horse's feet. Plenty of practice, he went on repeating all the time that Alice was getting him on his feet again. Plenty of practice. It's too ridiculous, cried Alice, losing her patience this time. You ought to have a wooden horse on wheels, that you ought. Does that kind go smoothly? Asked the knight in a tone of interest, clapping his arms around the horse's neck as he spoke, just in time to save himself from tumbling off again. Much more smoothly than a live horse, Alice said, with a little scream of laughter, in spite of all she could do to prevent it. I'll get one, the knight said thoughtfully to himself. 1 or 2 or several. There was a short silence after this, and the knight went on again. I'm a great hand at inventing things, you know. I dare say you noticed. The last time you picked me up, I was looking rather thoughtful. You were a little grave, said Alice. Well, just then I was inventing a new way of getting over a gate. Would you like to hear it? Very much indeed, said Alice politely. I'll tell you how I came to think of it, said the knight. You see, I said to myself, the only difficulty with feet, the head is high enough already. Now I put my head on top of the gate, and then the head's high enough already. And then I stand on my head, and then the feet are high enough already, you see. And then I'm over, you see. Yes, I suppose you'd be over when that was all done, said Alice thoughtfully. But don't you think it would be rather hard? I haven't tried it yet, the knight said gravely, so I can't tell for certain, but I'm afraid it would be a little hard. He looked so vexed that Alice He looked so vexed at the idea that Alice changed the subject hastily. "What a curious helmet you've got," she said cheerfully. "Is that your own invention too?" The knight looked down proudly at his helmet, from which hung from his saddle. "Yes," he said, "but I've invented a better one than that, like a sugar loaf. When I used to wear it, if I fell off the horse, it always touched the ground directly, so I had very little way to fall, you see. But there was a danger of falling off into it, to be sure. That happened to me once, and the worst of it was that before I could get out again, the white knight came and put it on. He thought it was his own helmet." The knight looked so solemn about it that Alice dared not laugh. I'm afraid you must have hurt him," she said in a trembling voice, "being on top of his head." "I had to kick him, of course," the knight said, and he took the helmet off again, but it took hours and hours to get me out. I was as fast as lightning, you know. "But that's a different kind of fastness," Alice objected. The knight shook his head. "It was all kinds of fastness with me, I can assure you," he said. He raised his hands in some excitement as he said this, and instantly rolled out of the saddle and fell headlong into a ditch. Alice ran to the side of the ditch to look for him. She was rather startled by the fall, as for some time he had kept on very well, and she was afraid that this time he was really hurt. However, though she could see nothing but the soles of his feet, she was very much relieved to hear that he was talking in his usual tones. "All kinds of fastness," he repeated, "but it was careless of him to put on another man's helmet especially with a man in it. How can you go on talking so quietly, head downwards?" asked Alice as she dragged him out by the feet and laid him in a heap on the bank. And there was Alice dragging the knight out of the ditch. The knight looked surprised at the question. "What does it matter where my body happens to be? My mind goes on working all the same. In fact, the more head downwards I am, the more I keep inventing new things. Now that is the cleverest sort of thing I ever did, was inventing a new pudding during the meat course." "In time to have it cooked for the next course," said Alice. "Well, that was quick work, certainly." "Well, not the next course," the knight said in a slow, thoughtful tone. "No, certainly not the next course." "Then it would have to be the next day, I suppose. You wouldn't have 2 pudding courses in one dinner." "Well, not the next day," the knight repeated as before. "Not the next day, in fact," he went on, holding his head down, his voice getting lower and lower. "I don't believe that pudding was ever cooked, in fact. I don't believe the pudding will ever be cooked. And yet it was a very clever pudding to invent." "What do you mean for it to be made of?" Alice asked, hoping to cheer him up, for the poor knight seemed quite low-spirited about it. "It began with blotting paper," the knight answered with a groan. "That wouldn't be very nice, I'm afraid." "Not very nice alone," he interrupted, quite eagerly. "But you have no idea what a difference it makes mixing it with other things, such as gunpowder and sealing wax. And here I must lead you." They had just come to the end of the wood. Alice could only look puzzled as she was thinking of the pudding. "You are sad," said the knight in an anxious tone. "Let me sing you a song to comfort you." "Is it very long?" Alice asked, for she had heard a great deal of poetry that day. "It is long," said the knight. "It's very, very beautiful. Everybody that hears me sing it, either it brings the tears to their eyes or else." "Or else what?" said Alice, for the knight had suddenly made a pause. "Or else it doesn't, you know. The name is called The Haddock's Eyes. Oh, that's the name of the song, is it? Alice said, trying to feel interested. No, you don't understand, the knight said, looking a little vexed. That's what the name is called. The name really is The Aged Man. Then I ought to have said that's what the song is called, Alice corrected herself. No, you oughtn't, that's quite another thing. The song is called Ways and Means, but that's only what it's called, you know. Well, what is the song then? Said Alice, who was by this time completely bewildered. I was coming to that. The song is sitting on a gate, and the tune's my own invention. And so saying, he stopped his horse and let the reins fall to its neck. And then slowly, beating time with the offhand and a faint smile lighting up his gentle, foolish face, as if he enjoyed the music of his song, he began. All of the strange things Alice saw in her journey through the looking glass, this was the one she always remembered most clearly. Years afterwards, she could bring the whole scene back again as if it had only happened yesterday. The mild blue eyes and the kindly smile of the night, the setting sun gleaming through his hair, the shining on his armor, a blaze of light that quite dazzled her. The horse quietly moving about with the reins hanging loose on its neck, cropping grass at her feet. The black shadows of the forest behind. All this she took in like a picture. With one hand shading her eyes, she leaned against a tree, watching the strange pair, and listening in half a dream to the melancholy music of the song. But the tune isn't his own invention, she said to herself. It's, I give thee all, I can give no more. And she stood and listened very attentively, but no tears came to her eye. I tell thee everything I can, there's little to relate. I saw an aged man sitting on a gate. Who are you, aged man, I said, and how is it that you live? And his answer trickled through my head like water through a sieve. He said, I look for butterflies that sleep among the wheat. I make them into mutton pies and sell them in the street. I sell them unto men, he said, who sail on stormy seas. And that's the way I get my bread, a trifle, if you please. But I was thinking of a plan to dye one's whiskers green, and always use so large a fan that they could not be seen. So having no reply to give to what the old man said, I cried, Come, tell me how you live, and thumped him on his head. His accent mild took up the tale. He said, I go my ways, and when I find a mountain rill, I set it in a blaze, and thence they make a stuff called Roland's massacre oil. Yet 2 pence halfpenny is all they'll give for my toil. But I was thinking of a way to feed oneself on batter, and so go on from day to day, getting a little fatter. I shook him well from side to side until his face was blue. Come, tell me how you live, I cried, and what it is you do. I hunt for haddocks' eyes among the heather bright, and work them into waistcoat buttons in the silent night. These I do not sell for gold, or coin of silvery shine, but a copper halfpenny, and that will purchase mine. And that will purchase 9, not mine. I sometimes dig for buttered rolls, or set limed twigs for crabs. I sometimes search for grassy knolls for wheels on hansom cabs. And that's the way, he gave a wink, by which I get my wealth. And very gladly will I drink your honour's noble health. I heard him then for I had just completed my design to keep the Mendy Bridge from rust by boiling it in wine. I thanked him very much for telling me the way he got his wealth, but chiefly for his wish that he might drink my noble health. And now, if e'er by chance I put my fingers into glue or madly squeeze a right-hand foot into a left-hand shoe, or drop upon my toe a very heavy weight, I weep, for it reminds me so of the old man I used to know, whose look was mild, whose speech was slow, whose hair was whiter than the snow, whose face was very like a crow, with eyes like cinders all aglow, who seemed distracted with his woe, who rocked his body to and fro, muttered numbingly and low, as if his mouth were full of dough, who snorted like a buffalo, with summer evenings long ago, sitting on a gate. As the knight sang the last words of the ballad, he gathered up the reins and took his horse's head along the road by which they had come. "You've only a few yards to go," he said, "down the hill and over that little brook, and then you'll be a queen. But you'll stay and see me off first," he added, as Alice turned with an eager look in the direction in which he pointed. "I shan't be long, and you'll have to wave your handkerchief. And when I get into the turning in the road, I think it'll encourage me, you see." "Of course I wait," said Alice. "And thank you so very much for coming so very far, and for the song, I liked it very much." "I hope so," said the knight doubtfully, "but you didn't cry as much as I thought you would." So they shook hands, and the knight rode away slowly into the forest. "It won't take long to see him off, I expect," said Alice. So she stood watching him. There he goes, right on his head as usual. However, he gets on again pretty easily. That comes of having so many things hung around the horse. And so she went on talking to herself as she watched the horse walking leisurely along the road and the knight tumbling off, first to one side and then the other. After a fourth and fifth tumble, he reached the turn. She waved her handkerchief and waited until he was out of sight. "I hope it encouraged him," she said, as she turned and to run down the hill. "And now for the last brook and to be a queen. How grand it sounds." A few steps brought her to the edge of the brook. "The 8th square at last," she cried, and bounded across, and threw herself down to rest on a lawn as soft as moss, with a little flower bed dotted here and there. "Oh, how glad I am to get here! And what is this on my head?" she exclaimed in a tone of some dismay, as she put her hands up to something very heavy that was fitted all around her head. How can it be? How can it have gotten there without my knowing it?" she said to herself, as she lifted it off and set it on her lap to make out what it could possibly be. It was a golden crown. And there is Alice being crowned. And that, my dear readers, is where we shall leave things for today. Until next time, goodbye. Keep reading.